of like just wanted to they were kind of at each other, and they would do the opposite of what the guy wanted to do at the time. I get the feeling that there was just this tension, and that was just kind of their way of expressing it, and just, they really both needed a vacation from each other. The best thing they could have done was just take a break away from each other. But I do think that, Ed had his studio, and I think at that point, things had shifted. That's why it was very different from Diver Down. And Ed was just ready to go, and he didn't want to wait for this. And I think there's also the family thing with Ed. That's huge. And I think he felt betrayed by the solo thing, and then it was turning into this movie, project. And he was starting to see, kind of the flashing lights going like, okay, this is not looking good. The singer is starting to have these other ambitions that aren't really in, for Ed, Van Halen was always enough, and he didn't need anything else.
Did you guys read Ted's book?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. In that book, it is so strange to me that he's the one who pushed Dave to go solo, and he really thought it was going to help Van Halen. Meanwhile, it literally drove him out of the band, because once those two videos became literally two of the biggest videos MTV ever played.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden he's getting a whole other level of attention. He's not just the lead singer of Van Halen. He is a mega 80s star. You know what I mean? And he's now getting a movie offer, and Purple Rain just happened, and so then that whole door gets open, and why not have Dave, who has the hottest videos, do a movie, and then he wants Ed to write the soundtrack, and Ed's like, what, are you fucking kidding me? Like, it becomes, like, as Ed likes the term in many parts of the books, too goofy. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, hey, I'm a musician, goddammit. This is getting ridiculous. And Dave liked the whole vaudeville thing, and that's Dave, and that was Ed. But I think, the two opposite polar ends were getting further and further spread apart. But it's weird in that book, and Ted's so weird, because if you read that time, even as an executive at Warner Brothers, he really...
This is how you're missing the point. And you see this time and time in the book and in the conversations with Ed. So you have Ted, and you have even Dave to some degree, who are both, they're playing the game, right? They're playing, it's Ted's job to play the pop music game. And Ted and Dave maybe also make the mistake of thinking that everybody is playing the game. That's how everybody is motivated. That's how everybody's driven. Like, how on earth could Ed Van Halen break up the band at their very height? To them, it wouldn't happen. So they felt like they had license to push it as hard as they wanted to. It didn't think anybody would walk away. But Ed wasn't driven that way. Ed's always been driven, by his art, by what he wants to do. He could sort of almost give a damn. He loved it, obviously, when Jump went to number one and became hugely popular. But that wasn't his driving motivation. I think Ted made all these assumptions. I think Dave made a bunch of assumptions. But when it gets down to it, Ed's going to follow his muse. He's going to follow his heart. He's going to follow his internal compass. Everybody else be damned. That's no surprise. If any of them had bothered to actually listen to what Ed had to say at any given time, they would have known that wouldn't have been the case.
But if that's the case, then how do you even make a case for Van Halen 3? Because Ed was following his muse totally with that album, and he was crushed when it didn't reach the level of success he was used to.
Yeah, well, that was the lesson that he learned on that record, was that, hey, man, I actually do care. The truth is Ed, even when he wasn't following even when he was totally following his muse, had been incredibly lucky, even finding Sammy, who was, a good commercial entity, and these other producers. So I think Ed just always assumed that, whenever he followed his own compass, it was going to be fine because it had worked. When it got to Van Halen 3, he found out, well, it doesn't always work. And it was a very, very tough lesson for him to learn.
Or do you think it's because he needed a heavy-handed producer and that wasn't available at the time?
I don't think Ed wanted a heavy-handed producer. I think that was the thing. I think Ed, again, this is a period where Ed was really struggling. His marriage was, going through some troubles. And he went through this whole crazy drama, first with Sammy and then with this very temporary period with Dave, changing managers and everything. And I think there really wasn't anybody, you had Ray Daniels, but he was too new to really stand in there and say, like, Ed, you have to do this, to really put his foot down. I think, Ray was testing the waters a bit and didn't really know where to, put the hammer down, so to speak. And I mean, yeah, that album definitely needed a producer, some guy who just wasn't really known for, making hit television show themes. So,
well, yeah. Well,
but again, you guys are looking at this as if there's one Ed Van Halen.
Right.
And I think if anything that we're trying to point out in this book is that there's an artistic evolution that happens. And there is a rise, and there's a fall, and then there's another rise, thank God, before he died. So, I mean, you have to look at it within this broader context. And that's really what we tried to present in this book, is that everybody wants to look at this little point in time and say that's Ed Van Halen, or they want to look at a different point in time and that says that. But it's a flowing river,
No, of course. I mean, that's everybody, I guess.
So while we're talking about that time period, let's talk about Ray Daniels, who was their manager during the 1990s. If you've been following the band, Sammy Hagar was never a fan of Ray Daniels and blames him for a lot of the downfall for the band. Now, you could say, well, Sammy's got one perspective. He's one-sided because it was his old manager that was in the band and unfortunately passed away and Sammy lost control. But in your book, you talk to Michael Anthony, who pretty much says, no, it was Ray who got Sammy out of the band and blames him for that as well. And Mike is viewed as pretty even keel. So for him to say that is pretty damning. Now, you did interview Ray for the book, which I thought was really interesting to get his perspective on things. And interestingly, he says things like, well, I wasn't really trying to get Dave in the band, or, people think I had more input into getting Gary into the band than I did. So do you guys think, after getting Mike's input and Ray's input, Ed's input, and knowing Sam's thoughts, do you think Ray gets a bad rap for what happened to Van Halen, or is it justified?
No, I think that Ray was trying to do his job. He had a difficult job to do. I think ultimately what he thought his job was to keep the band busy, to keep them working, to bring in money, to bring them opportunities. And that's what he was doing. So it was really interesting because, he was in Canada most of the time. He was Russia's manager. So he was, in some ways, not so much in the thick of things. I mean, he was probably looking at the band maybe too objectively in a weird way, too much like a pro manager would look at the career and moving it forward, and not maybe sensitive to some of the personal dynamics that was going on. But I think Ray, in the book, he makes no bones about it, that it was Ed's band. And, as manager, he's probably going to, move in that direction. And what Ed wanted at that time just felt very different than what Sammy wanted. And more of what I think is interesting is, when you talk about being confused about Ed and Dave's relationship and how they split up, or Ed and Sammy's relationship and how they split up, it sort of has more to do with a sort of passive-aggressive quality that Ed Van Halen has. Like, I think he was, at that time, artistically done with Dave and was looking for maybe an excuse to end it because he was no longer feeling it. And I think the same way with Sammy Hagar. He didn't like what Sammy was, his lyrics or his work ethic, and was looking for a way out, and maybe, use Daniels in that sort of way to help push Sam out of the band. I don't think it has anything to do with Daniels. I think he was, trying to do his job in a professional kind of way. And it had everything to do with Ed and Alex. Believe me, no manager would have been able to push Sammy Hagar out of the band if Ed and Alex didn't want it.
Good point. Do you think the symbolism of Ed shaving his head was out of pure frustration where he was at the time artistically, in the sense that almost like he was almost like freeing himself of the old Ed Van Halen with the long hair and everything? Do you think that was some sort of weird symbolization?
Oh, absolutely. It's funny because the first time I interviewed Ed was November of 1994 for the Balance album. And I can still remember to this day the excitement going up to 5150. And I'm milling around outside, on the driveway out in front. And this guy walks by me and is like, "Hi." And I'm like, "Oh, hi." And like, "Who the hell's that?" And it took me a while to realize that was Ed, because we didn't have the internet then. We didn't have TMZ
Sure.
and all this other stuff. Short hair and a beard and sunglasses, and
Yeah.
who was that guy? But yeah, he just was reinventing himself. He told me some stuff about Sammy then that I couldn't really print then, but he was upset. He was just he felt like, man, I'm at this creative peak. I'm making, better, more interesting music than ever. And I really wanted just to dance. And he was really kind of absorbing a lot of the, the grunge music and everything that was happening at the time. Mm-hmm. And, he didn't want to do, Rock and Roll Weekend and I Can't Drive 55 and,
Right.
party girls music. He wanted to do something a bit deeper. And I think, he was just frustrated. And I think he just was really just kind of breaking out of this shell, and it was really, he had told so many different stories about the reason why he cut his hair, but it was just this act of just utter, feeling just like, I can't take it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And now, also, in terms of being frustrated, when Ed tried to expand Van Halen's sound on Van Halen 3, it seemed like he got shut down. Do you think that this is what made him fearful of releasing new music going forward? That he was just afraid of the reaction?
That was a part of it, but it also, really a lot of that really came later. First of all, he just went into this personal crisis after that. So he just wasn't in really the mode to be creating music during that period. And when he finally came out of it, enough in, 2004 to do that tour, get back together with Sammy, do the tour, do the best of package and, do 3 new songs. I did that interview with him and Tony Iommi, and he just said, I don't know if I ever want to do any new stuff again. We did these new songs and, we played them live and people just sat there and no one talks about those songs, and he just felt like, why bother?
Right.
People at this point, Van Halen had this huge back catalog, you know, and that's what they became a classic rock band. People wanted to hear the hits.
Well, a lot of artists feel that way today. They keep saying they call their new songs the bathroom breaks. Like they have that sort of attitude, I'm killing myself to make this new music and put it out and then I go to play it, and it's like all people, and these are, catalog artists like Van Halen who have legendary backgrounds and hits and stuff, and it's gotten to that point for many people that, and there's some that forge ahead and want to really play, their new music, and other ones that just say, you know what, man, I'm just going to ride the catalog. So there seems to be a lot of that going on now, especially, and, look, we're living in an age, 2021, where people want to go to shows where the set list is guaranteed. For example, the Black Crowes right now are telling everyone, we are going to play the entire first album and then the hits from the first few albums. They're almost selling it like that. It's like people need a guaranteed set list before they even buy a ticket. Not hey, I love the Black Crowes, I want to check them out, I want to go see them this summer. It's no, wait. What are they playing? They're not playing Before the Frost, are they? They're not playing Three Snakes, are they? They want to know, no, we're going to play all the songs from Southern Harmony, and we're going to play the entire first album. And, it's interesting. This is where we're at.
I do feel like I agree with Chris. I think after later on, sort of Ed looked back on it and had that wisdom. But I think for me, I know everybody loves the first half of Van Halen's career and the stuff with Dave, but what was the real revelation in this book to me was almost the second half, what happened to Ed during the recording of Van Halen 3. He was going through therapy. He was almost in this heightened metaphysical, almost a manic state when he was creating that record. And he was barely sleeping at all. He just is experimenting. He's so excited. He's finally got complete control over the record. He's got a yes man producer. He's going to do what he wants. He's got the singer who he